This is going to be a very in-depth class because this camera is the most advanced camera I've ever done a class on. And maybe not by a huge margin, but yeah, definitely. It's got the most stuff of any camera I have seen to date, especially in the focusing system. This camera has really come at it with an incredible focusing system that can really be adjusted and manipulated in many, many different ways. And that is a big part about this class. But this whole class is about getting to know how to operate this camera and really master it. What we're going to be doing in here is going to be going through many different sections. And so I have the class all broken down into pretty logical sections. And we're going to go through each one of these and talk about it. So what we're going to do in here is we'll talk about a little of some basic things to begin with, just so that people get familiar with their camera who are new to photography. We have a large section on exposure controls, a lot of things about the different options you have setting here. And then the big focus section, there's a lot to talk about in this section. Now this used to be called drive controls, but now I call it capture controls to talk about a wider variety of features that go in there. We're then going to take a tour of the camera, looking at what all the rest of the buttons and dials do. We'll look at the options for the viewfinder and the monitor and what sort of things you can find useful in there. We'll take a quick tour of the function menu, which is a shortcut to a lot of the most popular features. We have a fairly significant section on shooting movies. There's a lot of things that are different about that, and we're going to go into it in there. We'll look at all the camera connections that you can connect this camera up with and using those items. We'll have a little section on lenses to kind of give you a showdown of what Sony has in their available lenses. And then the next several sections is the menu sections. We're going to go through each tab individually and go through all of the items in there. And then finally, we have the field setup guide where I show you how I would set the primary settings on this camera for some different types of photography. And by the end of this whole class, well, I think you should probably be an expert or near expert in this particular camera. There is a lot to know in this camera for sure. There is some additional resources that might be helpful even beyond this class, and I'll be giving you those links and places to go as we go through this class. Now, as we are going through this particular class, I will be referring in earlier sections of this class to places in the menu system where you can make particular types of adjustments. And you'll see this menu reference box come up. And so for those of you who like to do this, you can pause the video and you can jump ahead to that menu section and start making those changes. For others of you who don't want to do it right then, just continue watching the video and we'll eventually talk about that when we get to the menu section. And then later on in the class, I'll be referring back to earlier sections where I fully described how a feature worked. Generally, I try to only describe things once so as to save time. Now, part of this class is the PDF, the additional class notes that come with the full class. And in here is a variety of things. The first up is the entire menu system that is laid out in a visual manner that I think a lot of photographers would appreciate. Now, the first few pages of this are the entire list of the features, as well as my recommended places to set the camera for that particular feature. This is essentially a starting point for where you're going to want to adjust your own camera. And then throughout here after that is another section on the menu, but without my recommendations. So you can have just kind of a blank, clean slate of all the menu settings. And then we'll have some other recommendations and a few slides from the class that are got a lot of material that you might want to review a little bit later. And so this comes with the full purchase of the class and can be very handy, so you might want to print that out and have that as you watch the remainder of the class. Now, this class, as is kind of obvious, is on the Sony A7R V. And that's the priority in this class, is explaining how to capture good images, great images, with this particular camera. Now, there's a lot of things that are important in photography, lighting and composition, and well, we just don't have time to go into that in this particular class. There's a lot of things that you can hook up to this camera. You can hook it up to a computer and you can do tethered shooting. And that's great. And it's very helpful for a lot of people, but we're not going to completely go into everything that you can hook your camera up to. There's flashes and lenses and computers and tablets and phones and all sorts of things. And we just can't get into all of that. It's beyond the scope of this particular class. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to teach you how to take high quality photos and manually operate the camera. We will talk about the automatic operations of this camera, but we're going to really concentrate on how do you do things manually. That way, if you do them automatically, you'll know what's going on behind the scenes and you can set it up manually to make more repeatable efforts at what you are doing. Now, I don't know exactly what you know and what you don't know, and so I tend to kind of err on the side of, well, just explain it to make sure everybody knows what we're talking about. And so we will cover a few basics in this class, but I am going to try to just concentrate on explaining what all the features do so that everybody knows what they are. Now, Sony has a very short startup guide, which is not very helpful. They do have an instruction manual, which is okay by industry standards, I would say. And it is not the intention of mine to try to cover everything in the instruction manual in this class. That would quadruple the time of this class. I'm trying to cover what the most important features are for most people most of the time. There's going to be a few things in that instruction manual that you might need to reference at some point in time. There are certain detailed specifications and certain compatibility things that it addresses, and just deeper info on how something works in particular. But my goal is to try to eliminate your need to go to the instruction manual and try to explain as much as possible in this class. But just realize there are some additional resources, the instruction manual, as well as some other places that I can refer you to that I think might have some helpful information. Now, when you do look up information on this particular camera, it's helpful to know the name of the camera. And calling this the Sony A7R V or Mark V, well, maybe that does it, maybe it doesn't. Sony's official name is the ILCE-7RM5. And what that stands for is it's an interchangeable lens, compact E-mount camera. It's the 7 series. R stands for resolution. We'll get into that in a moment. And it's their Mark V or 5th version of this particular camera. Now, you might see this referred to by Sony or other people in different ways, using a V or a 5 or space or an alpha for the A or an A for the alpha. And so they're a little inconsistent in this particular case. And so if you are looking for information on it, just be aware that there are several different acceptable names for this camera. All right, a little bit on Sony history. They are, of course, known as a major electronics manufacturer that has actually a fairly light history when it comes to cameras and photography. They started with digital quite early on. They were one of the earliest companies to have digital. They had what I would consider to be some of the more advanced point and shoots in the early days of the digital realm. In order to get into the interchangeable lens market, they acquired the Minolta and Konica Minolta cameras and lens mount an entire system. And so they kind of got that as their ticket into the serious world of photography. But they quickly transitioned to mirrorless, first with a crop frame system and then with a full frame system. And that's what they've been mainly concentrating on in the most recent years. Now, if you look at what's available from Sony in interchangeable lenses, there are 2 main categories. I'll mention 2 more just to be aware of it. And this camera falls into the full frame mirrorless category, which is where they are putting their primary emphasis on new cameras and lenses for this. And there's a wide collection of cameras. The A1 is their top of the line camera at the moment. This is the one that does kind of everything as good as possible. The A9 series is designed more for sports photographers and photojournalists, as far as I can see. The A7 series, which actually encompasses a whole range of models, is kind of their mainline series of cameras. They have the R for resolution. They have just kind of the standard A7 for kind of regular basic photography, and the A7S, which is designed more for video shooting. They have a compact version, and then one more for vlogging and blogging. Now, they also have a crop frame collection of cameras that has not seen a lot of attention in recent years. They've really been focused more on the full frame, but they've had a lot of very popular cameras in that crop frame market. Now, while they're not selling them, I still do want to mention the fact that they do have, or did have, DSLRs, and they used a different term, SLT. I'm not going to get into it right here, but these are discontinued. But just be aware that there are different Sony cameras out there and a different set of lenses that do not work on this particular camera. Now, as far as lenses go, this uses an FE lens mount, which means it uses E-mount lenses on there, and there's a wide variety of them out there. And so you can look for FE mount lenses that are going to give you the full frame view in this particular camera. Now, the E-mount lenses are designed for their crop frame camera. And so both of these cameras, the full frame and the crop frame, use what's called an E-mount, but the type of lenses that they use on them are a little bit different. And we'll talk more about this in depth in the lens section on the class. Now, this is an A7 series camera, and this A7 series has been broken into 3 parts. And the part that we have here is one of their resolution models. And this is something that they've done since the very beginning, is they wanted to have one model that had kind of the maximum resolution available at the time. And as you can see that it's been rising in resolution over the years. It's kind of on a tick-tock schedule where one year they will upgrade the sensor resolution, and then the next year they'll upgrade kind of everything else in the camera. And this particular Mark V version is no increase in resolution, but kind of an upgrade in everything else, as I say. In their more mainline series, just the A7, 4 different versions of that camera, a little bit lower resolution, but a lot of the same features. And then they have an S series, which is designed more for video. Yes, you can take still photos. Yes, it's a camera designed for taking still photos, but its emphasis is doing video really well. And so there's a lot of similarities, but they're not identical between all of the collections in here. All right, as far as the care and handling of this camera, there are a lot of warnings. I'm not going to go through all of them, but let's just talk about a couple of them. Be careful not to let sand or dust to get into the product. This is a weather-sealed camera that should do pretty well under moisture, wet weather, a little bit of rain, a little bit of dust, but it's not incredibly well sealed. And so if you're going to be in a really nasty environment, shall we say, you're going to probably want to get some sort of protective cover for the camera. Sony recommends you use Sony accessories. And yes, I know that's so Sony can make more money selling accessories. There's a few things that I would definitely go with Sony, like batteries and battery chargers. Other things that maybe not so much. Memory cards, lenses, flash units sometimes. If you're going to be working with on-camera flash, I prefer sticking with the name brand manufacturer. If you're going to be doing more studio strobe manual stuff, well, then you can kind of do whatever you want. There's a lot of options there. There's a lot of warnings of what not to do. My favorite one is to not sit in a chair with this camera in your back pocket. I don't think I have any pants that have a back pocket that is that big, but I'll be aware of that. Now, as far as the construction, it's got a pretty standard magnesium alloy chassis. Couldn't find a photo of a Sony A7 Mark V, but it's very similar to the A7 Mark IV chassis, which is what's being used in all the current A7 cameras right now. It's a pretty strong, rugged camera, so you don't need to worry about that deforming on you in any way. In more particular to the weather sealing, the only thing that I've really figured out from Sony is that they say it has enhanced dust and moisture resistance. They don't give any statement as to exactly how good it is. And if this was my camera, and this is my camera, would I use it in a heavy downpour? Absolutely not. I would need a cover on it or something to protect it. If it was a light rain, I would not have a problem going out, getting a few shots, and then getting it back under protection. I just probably wouldn't shoot with it in a long period of time outside in a notable rain. I just think that it's probably not going to be good for this camera in that particular case. Now, this does have a mechanical shutter in it. We'll talk a lot about this. It is rated to 500,000 firings on the cycle, how long the life of it is supposed to last, which is the longest of any camera I've seen. There's a few cameras that have that setting out there. And the fact of the matter is that this camera may not be using that in all the cases. And so this is something that's going to last you for a very, very long time for sure on this particular camera. All right, let's make sure your camera is ready for today's class as well as me. You're going to want to have a charged battery because we're going to be taking test photos in here. And so you'll need a lens and you'll need at least one memory card in the camera. Go ahead and turn the camera on with the collar right around the shutter release. It's not my favorite place, but just, for now, we'll turn the dial to the auto position, you do need to press down on that button in the middle because it kind of locks into whatever position you have. So it's a little 2-3 finger affair to get that turned. And then go ahead and take a picture, which is what I'm going to do right now, just to make sure, yep, things seem to be working on my camera. If there's something that needs attention on yours, like a battery charging or memory card, now's a good time to take care of that. All right, one of the most important things to understand about these cameras is that there is firmware that runs all of the operations on the camera. And from time to time, the manufacturers do updates to the firmware to add new features or fix bugs or give you better performance on the camera. And I'm going to be working on this particular camera that has version 2.0 on it. And so this is something that you can get from Sony, and they've changed their way of doing this. You used to have to hook your camera up and use a program that you downloaded for Sony. And now you can download the new firmware onto your computer, transfer it to a memory card, put the memory card in the camera, go to the version option in the menu system, and update the firmware. There is more information about Sony about this, but that's kind of the basics of it. Now, if you want to take a look at what your firmware is, you're going to need to dive into the menu, and I will show you how to do that right here and now. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit the menu, and over on the left-hand side, we have our different tabs, and we want to go down to the utility box down here, the toolbox, and we're going to come down to the yellow number, gold number 13 setup option. We're going to go to the right, and we're going to look for version, which is right there. We're going to go to the right, and we can see the body identification, and I told you what the official name of the body was, and there it is, and we are at version 2. Now, at some point, they may do a small update or a big update, and in order to get that, once again, you need to go to Sony's website and update using the process that I talked about earlier. All right, for those of you who have had your camera for a little while and you kind of made a mess of things, if you would like to start fresh, like you got the camera right out of a brand new box and you want to reset your camera, you can do so. If you've already got a bunch of particular things set in and you don't want to reset, you don't need to reset. I've been messing around with this camera a lot, and so I would like to get it back to a standard form so that people in the class can follow me along. So I'm going to do a reset, and if you go into the setup menu, you can put your camera through a reset. Now, there's a couple different options on the reset. One is you can do kind of basic shooting and exposure information. So it's the items in those particular tabs. Or you can do a full menu, which is going to get to all the custom functions and custom buttons that you might have done. And that's the one that I'm going to want to do because I have been messing around with everything in this camera because that's my job. All right, so we're going to dive into the menu system. So once again, we're in the toolbox, but now we're going to be up on this reset save settings here. And so we are going to go over here, setting reset, and we're going to go to the right. And we could do a camera reset, which I'll just do just for fun here. Takes a moment. You can hear it clicking around and it resets. And yes, that was indeed lots of fun. We're going to do it again, but we're going to do initialize. And this is going to do the full menu. It's going to make sure that we really want to do this. And it's going to reboot automatically. Double confirmation here. So we press enter. It's going to take a few seconds. You'll hear everything kind of turning off and turning back on. And we need to choose our language right there. And yes, I understand this. And we are do not connect. So I'm going to press the garbage can there. Press OK there. I'm going to just press cancel that for right now. And so now we have a fully reset camera ready for the class. And if you want to reset your camera, you can just follow those steps along and get it completely reset. So there you go, folks. That's just the intro to a very in-depth class on a very in-depth camera. See you in the next sections.